Hi everyone, and welcome to the eighth lesson in our The Lord of the Flies GCSE series. If you haven't seen any of our videos before, what we're doing is we're going through all the key characters, themes, quotes, analysis, model answers, model paragraphs, context about the author, everything you need to know to add to your toolkit to make sure that you do the best you can in these upcoming GCSEs. And they really are very soon now. So if you're doing Lord of the Flies, hopefully this will be some good stuff for you. If not, go click on another video. Get something useful for yourselves. So today's lesson, we're going to be talking about violence and to some extent the loss of innocence, and that's linked to the violence. In previous weeks on this series, we've been looking at Ralph, Jack, Piggy, Simon the Beast as characters. If you haven't seen those videos, check them out. We've also gone through the theme of civilization versus savagery, and also fear, which was for one of you viewers. You commented, you asked for this video, and I performed the video last week. So if you do have any questions, comments, everything like that, please do comment down below, like the video if you like the content. But with that said, let's get started. So we're going to look at violence today. I'm going to move myself here for the rest of the lesson, I think. So I've got quite a few quotes that link to violence, and I'll explain those. And then at the end, we'll do a model paragraph on violence, which is obviously one of the major themes in the novel. Just a quick shout out to all of the other literature courses that I'm doing. So, you know, if you're doing Lord of the Flies, you're almost certainly also doing a Shakespeare and a Victorian novel, possibly some poetry. You're seeing the English language exams, most likely. Check out my channel. There's videos on all of those different content. So would love to see you watching that, commenting on that, just whatever I can do to help, really. So violence, we've got to have rules and obey them. After all, we're not savages, we're English, and the English are the best at everything. So this is Jack talking in chapter 2. And the reason that we see violence here is sort of the irony for one thing, and also just the arrogance for the other. So the fact that Jack ends up being someone who actually uses the rules as a way of committing violence, right? So he changes the rules and he enforces his own violent rules on his tribe, who he dictates over hard. So he ties up several boys with rope and bullies them and hurts them. Sam and Eric, for example, he does that to them to force them to be part of his tribe. It's also just this idea that we're English and the English are the best at everything. So just this kind of naivety of the boys. I mean, they're only little teenage boys, so they don't really know much at this point. So they the fact that they don't expect the island to go so badly, I suppose, it forebodes the violence that comes. There aren't any grown-ups, we shall have to look after ourselves. So this is the voice of reason. This is Piggy. So Piggy from the very start understands that this could all go very wrong, very badly, very quickly. He understands that there is violence that's a problem on the island, and he takes a lot of the violence himself, obviously, because Jack often shouts at him like, shut up, fatty, and just being really mean to Piggy and shoving him and all that stuff. So, but straight away, Piggy is trying to avoid the violence, and unfortunately, he's not fully successful in that. They looked at each other, baffled in love and hate. So this is Jack and Ralph looking at each other. This is a smaller type of violence, which then grows, right? So at the very beginning of the novel, they actually quite like each other and they're quite teammates, really. Ralph is chief, but Ralph gives special privileges to Jack, really. He says, well, you know, I'm chief, but you can be hunter and you can look after the hunters and basically just go off and do whatever you want, Jack. But this bit of love and hate, this juxtaposition here grows. And eventually, obviously, Ralph and Jack hate each other. And Jack hates Ralph so much that Jack even tries to obviously have Ralph killed at the end of the novel. So the violence grows from this little seed into this full-blown war between them. And I suppose in a way you could say that's a microcosm of World War II. So obviously European countries were allies, you know, like England and France and Germany and Italy, and obviously all of the countries of Europe. This isn't a geography lesson. I'm just going to sit here and list all of the European countries and world countries that were in the war, but they were friends and they traded with each other and they had a pretty good relationship. And then obviously that grew into disagreements, and then those disagreements grew into worse and worse situations until you do have men running around in fields shooting and killing at each other, right? So Jack and Ralph's situation is a bit of a microcosm of that, to show how the violence grows. That's a really good point. If you're watching this, that's a really good point to add in if you do have violence as your theme this year. Life is scientific. There's no beast, there isn't no fear unless we get thrown to people. So Piggy, he understands where the violence comes from as well. He understands in quite an interesting way that there isn't an outside source of violence like a beast. It's actually an internal source of violence that often comes from fear. And ain't that the truth? Like, if you think about Adolf Hitler, he really feared the Jews. He was disgusted of the Jews, but he also feared them. And that was one of the reasons why he spoke about them in such disgusting ways. He talked about Jewish people as rats and a virus and a disease and these terrible words that are so unfair and wrong. And him rounding them up and obviously the concentration camps and all of the horrors of World War II, really a lot of that violence came out of his fear of them and his fear of what he believed they were doing to Germany. So fear and violence are very strongly linked. And obviously I spoke about fear last week, so you can feel free to check out that video and see some of these links if you want. Maybe there is a beast, maybe it's only us. So this is Simon. It's a similar point. Basically, Simon understands as well that the beast, or whatever the beast represents, is more likely to be something within them. And obviously the violence that comes is all from them. Even in the first chapters where, you know, or second chapter, let's say, where the boys create the fire, the huge fire, and it burns up half the island and it kills one of the little boys, the boy with the mulberry colored birthmark, right? All of this violence comes from them. It's in them. It's not some beast. It's not some snake. It's them. So violence comes from them. Same as it did in Golding's world. So Golding would have seen violence in the kids he taught because he was a high school English teacher. And he also would have seen this in war because he fought in World War II. Piggy, what are we? Humans or animals or savages? What's grown-ups going to think? So Piggy gets sick of the violence very quickly and he tries to make the others think. But the problem is that none of the others really care about what Piggy thinks. So he quite a few times uses his persuasion to try and get the boys to stop being so violent and being so lazy and being so fearful. But he fails. He can't manage to stop them. I'm the beast. You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you. So this is where Simon is hallucinating in front of that pig's head that's on the stick, right? But the fact that the beast says, you knew I'm part of you, again, one of the ways you would talk about violence if this came up in the exam is you talk about how violence is innate. It's part of the human condition. And you can link it to World War II very easily, for example, which Golding would have based some of this on. That was really freaky. I looked at the picture of the violence here and I swear I thought that eye blinked at me. I swear this is a soft drink. What the heck? That was so weird. Anyway, so I'm part of you. And so violence, you could do a whole paragraph on how violence is clearly within the boys. It's not within them immediately. So the first time Jack and Ralph and Simon are faced with a pig, he can't bring himself to stab the pig, right? But then he comes up with this idea of painting his face, and the way that his face is painted is also very violent. It's like white paint with reds and black slashes and all sorts on his face. So he makes himself look more violent, and then he becomes more violent. And then that violence grows and grows and grows and gets more and more out of control, in the same way that the fire grows and grows and grows and becomes more and more out of control till it kills that little boy with the birthmark on his face. Just spitting some real facts today. Anyway, in the middle of them, with filthy body, matted hair and unwiped nose, Ralph wept at the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true wise friend called Piggy. So violence is a huge part of Ralph's character development. So Ralph, by the end of the night, like Ralph got caught up in the violence too, right? He throws spears at a pig. He wants praise for that. He also tells Piggy to shut up. He also ends up being one of the boys that stabs Simon to death. They all do. Even Piggy is one of the boys that stabs Simon to death. So that violence is within all of them. But at the end, Ralph at least understands that evil and violence within himself, and he calls it the darkness of man's heart, which I think is exactly right. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. couldn't resist putting that quote in. Obviously, you've got the triadic structure of kill, cut, spill. It's rhythmic as well. It adds to this sense of almost tribal violence, like kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. Yeah, you've got that. I think it's an exclamation mark on the end. I'll be honest, I just wrote this in. I didn't double check myself for this one because I've used it so much, but I'm pretty sure it ends with an exclamation mark. And if it doesn't, that's not a huge deal. If it does, the exclamation mark shows the force of the words more. If not, the rhythm shows the force of the words, and you've got these very violent verb choices: cut, kill, spill, right? The imagery of the blood. The boys are celebrating violence in this image, right? They're celebrating violence. So they start by not liking violence. They start by being scared of the blood. By the end, they're actually, not even the end, by halfway through, they're actually celebrating violence and dancing around as they're doing violent things. Few more, and then we'll do our model paragraph. So the conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. Piggy, saying nothing, with no time for even a grunt, traveled through the air sideways. So the violence of the conch exploding is very significant. I've spoken about this a bit before, but the conch obviously represents civilization and order. So when that violently explodes into 1,000 white fragments, it shows that savagery and violence have now fully taken over, and there's not really any way back. Piggy's death is also incredibly violent. A huge boulder, like the size of a car, smashes on top of him and like sends him flying and crushes him, right? And then I didn't put in the imagery of Piggy's like body, but it's very gross. Like the imagery of his corpse or his dying body and then his corpse is disturbing. It shows violence. You can look that up if you want to talk about the violence of the deaths. That's a big part of it. There's also violence and gore in the way that the Lord of the Flies head is being talked about. So you could also think about that. Jack slammed his knife into a trunk and looked around challengingly. So this is right near the beginning. The fact that Jack slams the knife into the tree trunk again shows that violence is in him from the very beginning. And he is probably the most violent character. The only other character that might get the award for the most violent would be Roger. Roger is also extremely violent. Finally, sharpened a stick at both ends. So this imagery is really haunting and violent. So Jack sharpens a stick at both ends to stick the pig's head on when he sacrifices it to the Lord of the Flies. But he also gets his tribe to sharpen a stick at both ends before they go to literally hunt Ralph. And so we get this image that if they had caught Ralph, they would have decapitated him, taken his head off, stuck it on the end of a stick, and sacrificed it to the Lord of the Flies, exactly the same way that they did with the pig. So the violence goes from being violent, like a little bit violent to each other, but somewhat playfully violent, to actually violent with each other, to violent to animals like pigs, to violent to each other overtly, like looking to kill each other. Okay, so we're going to do a paragraph here. As usual, I'm just going to quickly highlight the fact that I've done this one, because otherwise I will forget. I'll pop this over on this side now as well. Okay, so the significance of violence in the novella. There's several ways that you can think about this, but one of the major ones one of the most significant ways that violence is used, not in the novella, sorry, the novel. Novella is a short novel. Lord of the Flies is not a short novel, it's a long novel. Violence is used in the novel is through the way that it exposes the violent tendencies and evil within the boys. At first, the boys are hesitant to express violence towards one another, choosing instead to show violence only in small ways, such as Jack slammed his knife into the tree trunk and looked around challengingly. Which conveys that the violence is in him but he is not able to express it by killing a pig. This quickly descends into major violence in all of the boys, shown by kill the pig, cut his throat, spill his blood. With the triadic structure, use of rhythm, and harsh, brutal verb choices, all indicating that the boys quickly learn not only to embrace their violence, but to celebrate it. This is shown as the reader, we feel disturbed that a group of teenage boys could so quickly descend into chaos and violence. This is significant because Golding fought in World War II, so he would have seen just how awful and violent men could be towards each other in this context. There you go. So we've got a model paragraph. We've got about violence being used to show the evil within us. And actually, I'm just gonna, so Golding fought in World War II, so he would have seen just how awful and violent men could be towards each other in this context, and that this violence seems to be innate in mankind, human beings. So we start with the idea that violence in the novel is showing violent tendencies within the boys, and then we go through how Jack starts not that violent, just kind of showing violence towards a tree trunk, but scared to do anything else. But very quickly, not only he, but the rest of the boys also show a lot of violence, and that descends them into chaos very quickly. So hopefully that was helpful. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please do comment down below. I'd love to hear from you, and I will see you in the next one.